Retaliatory tariffs by Ottawa are now in effect, a direct response to the U.S. placing tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. However, that move comes too late for some workers in Ontario. Megan Roberts is following that story for us. Megan, what do we know?
Well, those steel workers are being laid off effective today, Natasha, and that is due to those U.S. tariffs. There are a total of 40 people that are going to be losing their jobs effective today by a pipe manufacturer. And when this was announced, the company said that this was due to changes in exports due to those American tariffs. So that's one side of this happening today. The other side is that the counter tariffs, the Canadian counter tariffs, are also taking effect. $16.6 billion worth. We know there's a 25% tariff on steel, on U.S. steel, 10% on aluminum, and also 10% on some consumer goods. So what kind of goods are we talking about here? There's a huge long list of consumer goods, including pizza, including chocolate, and including bourbon and whiskey. If it seems a little bit random, there's quite a lot on that list of consumer goods. It's not. The reason that they're targeting these specific products is to exert maximum political pressure on the Trump administration. So let's go through those examples I gave again, and I'll explain why. So bourbon and whiskey very famously comes from Kentucky. Somebody who also comes from Kentucky is Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. So his state will be hit hard by this. Pizza. Frozen pizza, a lot of it is made in Wisconsin, and Paul Ryan also comes from Wisconsin. He's a senior Republican. And finally, of course, chocolate is famously made by Hershey, produced in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was an incredibly important state, key to Trump's victory in the election. So these are the kind of examples of why these products are being targeted. Now, in addition to the tariffs, there's also $2 billion in aid set aside for Canadian industries affected by these tariffs. And we also know that as part of his Canada Day plans, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is visiting manufacturers affected by these tariffs in Leamington, Ontario, and in Regina, Saskatchewan. Natasha.
So what happens next, Megan? What can Canadians expect moving forward?
Well, there could be a rise in prices on some of these products because as they cross the border and the tariffs are applied, that could be passed on to the consumers. So some people are now considering what kind of changes they may or may not make. Here's what people had to say.
I try and shop local whenever I can, so it wouldn't necessarily affect me as far as I understand.
I just purchased 4 bottles of American wine that I'm feeling really guilty about, but it's delicious and I probably won't do that again.
It doesn't matter for me. Like, if we can buy Canadian, if the American will be higher in the prices.
I'd like to keep a tight budget. Yeah. And food here is already expensive, plus like our taxes. So how much is it going to go up?
So we'll have to wait to see how prices may be affected by all of this. But there is one other trade threat that's looming over the country, and that is Donald Trump's trade threat for vehicles, a 25% tariff on vehicles. There's been no formal action taken yet, but about 80% of cars made in Canada are exported, many of them across to the U.S. And so certainly it's something that's on a lot of people's minds as these counter tariffs come into effect. Natasha.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Now, this trade dispute has been simmering for quite a while, but it boiled over in late May, and that's when the Trump administration said Canada would no longer be exempt from steel and aluminum tariffs. So in response, Canada announced retaliatory tariffs to the tune of $16.6 billion. And then things got worse in June. Despite Trump calling his relationship with Trudeau a 10 out of 10 at the G7 summit, on Twitter he accused the Prime Minister of being dishonest and weak. The war of words has also put a strain on NAFTA talks. Those are likely to stretch into next year. This is big news here in Canada with these retaliatory tariffs. They've been dominating the headlines. Lots of people writing into us about it. But we haven't heard anything from the U.S. president. Is this even on Washington's radar?
Oh, for sure it's on Washington's radar, yes. And I'm sure it's on the president's radar, too. He's in New Jersey this weekend for sort of a getaway, but he has been commenting on other tariffs that other countries are imposing, and I'm sure that Canada is on his mind in that sense, but I wouldn't read anything into the fact that it hasn't ended up in his Twitter feed. This trade dispute is something that he's certainly focused on.
You know, our Canadian government specifically targeted Republican-held states for where they were going to implement the tariffs. So do you think that's going to have any impact on how the midterms go?
Well, I think that's a good question. Canada isn't the only one to target specific swing states in the U.S. that had supported President Trump in the 2016 election, and where there might be some sort of sway affecting Republican congresswomen and men and perhaps senators in the midterm election. So I think it's very strategic and quite clever on behalf of Canada and some of the other countries who have done the same thing. Whether or not it actually has an impact, though, it's too early to say.
Now, yesterday, President Trump sent a very friendly Canada Day message to our Governor General, Julie Payette. He praised the country's close bond, thanked Canada for their partnership on the world stage. And some were taken aback, you know, because in recent weeks, he's been very critical, at least of our Prime Minister, calling him weak and other things. What do you make of the pleasant tone of his message?
You know, I don't think President Trump sees that as incongruent. I think he believes very much that Canada and other very close U.S. allies have been hurting the United States in terms of trade. And so that was a huge campaign issue for him in 2016, and he is acting on that. But that doesn't mean, I think, in his view, that he doesn't still see Canada and other countries as close allies. I was with him last week when he was visiting a plant in Wisconsin, and he talked about Canada there and talked about how Canada had been a partner in fighting the world wars, and that he loved Canada. And I think he believes that, but doesn't love the trade imbalance and the trade relationship. And so whether you agree with how he's responding to that or not, he sees them as two different issues.
So how do you think he's going to respond? Because there's a possibility, there's a hope certainly in this country that he's going to remove the tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel. But is he actually going to double down and bring in further tariffs?
Well, I think if you look at how he's responded to other countries, China comes to mind, who have put in retaliatory tariffs. There's no real suggestion that he would back down. I think that if he does decide to remove the tariffs, it would be because of a broader agreement. And of course, the United States is working on an agreement with Canada and Mexico on NAFTA. The president has also said that there's a possibility of having individual agreements with Canada and with Mexico on trade. So I think we have to kind of wait and see how those talks go, and they haven't been going very well, and see if that affects the tariffs. But I don't think, based on how President Trump has responded so far, that retaliatory tariffs from Canada or from any other nation would push him in the direction of backing down.
The fact of the matter remains that this is not where anybody wants to be, both in Canada and the United States. It will have a very detrimental impact on the economies of both countries at a pivotal time. It will hit us harder and sooner than it has in the United States. Their economy is going in the other direction. And I suspect it's not so much now about how we handle these things or to do a retrospective. It's more so, what do we do in the coming days? Some of the things that we could do are what we should have been doing for some years now, and that is to diversify our economy, capitalize on the comprehensive economic trade agreement that we currently have with the European Union. Trade agreements with other countries also give us tariff-free access. Europe is in the same proverbial boat, so to speak, and so there may very well be an openness to do more trade with Canada on more products. It's a full court press is the short answer. We have to continue to engage with the Americans, but at the same time, look to other markets and ways in which we can buttress the Canadian economy.